Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Giant Sen. In 2006, the Australian Coast Watch found a ship floating out at sea that was completely empty with a broken tow rope. Finding a ship floating with no one aboard is always a strange kind of mystery, but things only got more mysterious from there on out. Investigators had absolutely nothing to go off of that could give them any kind of clues. The name of the ship was printed on the side, but that's it. There was nothing else to identify the ship, there were no documents or belongings, no reports of missing boats, no records of distress signals, like literally nothing. They can't even figure out who it belonged to or where it came from. Their best guess is that the ship was possibly used to supply food and fuel to fishing boats, but that does not explain why no one tried to save it or even look for it. Was there someone on it when it got lost? Who knows?
Number 9. Elmer McCarty. This one is insane, I had to throw it in here. Elmer McCarty, back in 1911, so a bit more recent than the Coliseum days, he decided to be a rootin' tootin' criminal, and he attempted to rob a train. Unbeknownst to him, that train was not full of gold, but rather it was full of passengers. So he collected a whopping $46 instead. Instead of a gold heist, he got $46, which back in the day was still not bad, I'm not gonna lie. Things were going fine until he was shot by a lawman. Now this is when things start to get really insane. Elmer's body was embalmed and then sold by the Undertaker to this traveling carnival. His body was an exhibit almost, and for the next 60 years, his body was passed around as a prop. It was sold between haunted houses, wax museums, that kind of stuff. Check out this guy who tried to do this and blah blah blah. Such as I'm doing now, but I would have his body here? I don't know, people are weird. Eventually, the guy's body, like his real body, don't forget, ended up in California at an amusement park funhouse at Long Beach. Come 1976, there's a crew there filming the movie The $6 Million Man, and that's when Elmer's finger broke off, revealing that it was an actual mummy and not a prop on the set. They went to film The $6 Million Man and ended up finding the $46 man in real life. That is so gross. Imagine that. Some guy with a boom mic's like, Number 8. Fake France. Towards the end of World War I, Paris was tired of seeing, things that they love get blown to smithereens, more than fair. So they figured, let's try and fool the Germans flying overhead. Let's just build a fake Paris. Yeah, a fake Paris. Let's psych them out. They created a decoy, a very large decoy. This life-size stunt double was posted up only a few miles west of the actual city in order to protect it. And it worked. This tiny town called Masons Lafitte, now of course it's looking a lot more full. Now it's like a rich town, not fake buildings, but actual real buildings where rich people live. That's fun. There were 3 different zones set up just in case anything were to drop around the real Paris. Zone A was northeast of the city, had fake train stations and mimicked a suburban region of St. Denis, but it had a big fake Gare du Nord train station. That was the whole pull over there. Zone B, northwest of the city, that was Masons Lafitte, the main fake Paris city I just talked about. And Zone C was the industrial area. So basically it was just east of the city, and they had a massive factory built with literally nothing inside of it. Just a big shell. This sounds a lot like Home Alone, just on a larger scale when you think about it. But with these missions only happening overnight back then, creating a light show with some big props wasn't a bad idea. Lights were carefully spaced out on the ground so it looked like a breathing city from above. Check it out. They Looney Tuned the Germans, and it worked. How amazing is that? Number 7, Mad Jack. During World War II, you needed all the power you could get, but one man, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Churchill, aka Mad Jack, great nickname, he had a different mindset when it came to battle and weaponry. He believed that any British soldier going into battle without a sword was improperly dressed. Also, fun fact about Mad Jack here, he represented Great Britain in the World Archery Championships. So not only did he have a sword, but he also went into battle with a longbow. Yeah, like an Avenger. History has acknowledged Mad Jack as the last man to officially take out an enemy in combat by using a longbow, which is pretty cool. But here's the most intimidating part about him. Before combat, Mad Jack would play the bagpipes, right before drawing his sword and then running at you in battle. Can you imagine? That's some Game of Thrones stuff. A dude ripping the bagpipes, dropping it, and then sprinting at you full on with a sword and a longbow? Good game. I would just fold. I'd throw my on the ground. I'd be like, nope, you win. Take it. Take all the land. Number 6, Ball the Burning Men. If you're gonna party like it's 1999, at least do so safely, Back in 1393 in Paris, these knights would put on these fun party performances for the king. They would dress up and pretend that they were wild beasts. They would soak their armor with shrubbery and dry grass and hay. They would stuff it, anything to make them look like, I don't know, a hairy beast almost. Which, first of all, great bit, pretty itchy. honestly, great commitment. The party was going well, and they planned for these wacky performances, so they had to ban candles and torches from this room. The king's brother, he was drunk, maybe he was, at a festival of drunkenness prior, I don't know. He walked in with a torch, and all hell broke loose. He got too close to one of these knights, one of these stuffed knights, and, well, he caught on fire, and yeah, you could probably figure out the rest. It was bad news. Number 5, coffee ban. This is the worst of the worst right here, halfway, let's do it. Murad IV, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. This guy banned coffee. Yeah, what an absolute monster. He was born in 1612, and for the most part, his mother was ruling through him because, he was so young and all. But when he got a little older, he put forth these laws just because he could, and he made these laws punishable by death, so he wasn't playing around. Yeah, this guy banned coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. What a party pooper. He would take this so seriously as well, he would actually disguise himself as a civilian at nighttime and then wander around the streets aimlessly in hopes that he would catch one of these dark roast renegades. If you were caught outside having a quick smoke break, you weren't arrested, you weren't charged or anything like that, but rather Murad IV himself would just take off your head right there in the streets. No trial, no jury, just straight to execution. How horrible is that? No coffee? Could you imagine getting your head because you had a coffee? Get out of here. Number 4, royal curse. The remains of Polish queens and kings were discovered back in April 1931 in a crypt in Vilnius. Polish researchers didn't even know what they were in for. A storm had flooded a cathedral in Vilnius, and they threw down sandbags to preserve the area. God forbid it flooded, obviously. But on the night of April 25th, they had followed the water into this lost chamber that held the remains of Polish kings and queens. No one has found them at any point before. These remains were still buried with the crown. It was like a whole scene untouched. It was from the 15th century. What a find, right? Sadly, the flood ended up ruining all of these remains, and this is when things start to get a little mysterious. All those involved in these findings began to die in unusual circumstances afterwards. One professor had died after falling down a lift shaft in his apartment. Another guy died before him as well due to undisclosed medical issues, but apparently it was sketchy or not supposed to happen. Another professor, years later, who worked in the crypt as well, became paralyzed randomly at 62. A sculptor, also involved, died when untying his shoelace, so a freak accident. And another professor died in 1936 shortly after visiting the crypt again. I hope this isn't an ancient curse because these guys were legitimately trying to preserve history and avoid the crypt flooding. We need a Ouija board to clear this whole situation up. We need one guy to be like, hey, by the way, just explain everything. Number 3, the Festival of Drunkenness. Wait, is this an actual thing? Hold on. Nowadays we have parties for just about everything. There's a baby on the way, let's party. Baby just came out, let's party. Baby turned 1, now we gotta party at like 11 a.m. We just love celebrating, we'll find excuses to celebrate. Well, the Festival of Drunkenness in Egypt back in the 15th century they got right to the point. Just drink your faces off. That's it. This religious event, and yeah, you heard me, religious event, was to celebrate the Egyptian sun god Ra. And the story goes as such. Ra stopped the end of the world, way back in the day, when Hathor was planning on devouring all of life. So Ra successfully thwarted their plan by getting them drunk off 7,000 jars of beer. That's a lot of IPAs, oh my. The beer was dyed red to look like blood. Hashtag pranked ya. So now the god was so drunk that it couldn't, devour everybody. So ancient Egyptians would honor this, again, religious event by getting absolutely plastered. If you didn't pass out, that was considered offensive, like not burping after a meal. Also, drink responsibly. Number 2, Caesar and Caligula. Running the clock back to 12 CE, Gaius Caesar, aka Caligula, aka the Roman emperor at the time, apparently he was close with his horse. I had 2 dogs growing up. I would ride or die for those little piggies, okay? I get it. I'm an animal lover myself. And if I had the money, yeah, I would probably make them a house, just for them just to run around with and all that jazz. Well, he gave his horse a marble stall, and it got to the point where they were so close, Caligula was about to appoint the horse to high office of council, but he was taken out. Imagine if he had lived and this happened. What would those meetings look like? What would they smell like, rather? I don't want to know. Let's move on. And finally, coming in number 1, Adrian Carton de Wyatt. Over the course of 6 decades and 4 wars, Lieutenant General Adrian Carton de Wyatt survived the impossible multiple times. He's considered one of the most dedicated soldiers of all time because, well, for starters, after he lost his left hand and his left eye, Adrian did not retire. In fact, the British Army officer went on to experience 10 more horrible injuries. As World War I broke out in November 1914, Carton was serving and he was opposing the forces of the Dervish state. In doing so, he was shot in the arm and face, that's how he lost his left eye. But a grim detail shared by Lord Ismay, who served alongside the soldier, said in 1964 that the doctor at the time couldn't do anything, not a single thing, about his eye. So he must have been in pure agony the entire time. Literally, he must have been just the worst pain. Lord Ismay continues to believe that losing his eye was actually a blessing in disguise, because the incident allowed for Adrian to relocate to Europe, where even more action was waiting for him. Once stationed in Europe, Adrian received wounds to the head, hand, stomach, groin, leg, ankle, all by bullets, all a bad time. And if that's not inspiring enough, he survived numerous plane crashes and a broken back afterwards. If you feel like reading more incredible details about the soldier and the diplomat, there's a book on his whole life. And yeah, it's more interesting than I just made it sound.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Rhode Island vampire. Admittedly, witch and vampire hunts aren't exactly a topic covered in most history classes, but this is truly a pretty crazy story. In the late 1800s, tuberculosis was spreading pretty rapidly in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont. This obviously would have been pretty terrifying for the residents of these places, but things quickly took a very dark turn. Since many of the people who were passing away from this illness appeared very obviously ill with sunken, drained faces, for some reason, the logical response was that people believed that they had been the prey of vampires. There was a family in Exeter, Rhode Island that had multiple people pass away from the illness, so some people believed that someone in this family must be the feeding vampire. They even went as far as to exhume the bodies of some of the deceased family members to make sure that they weren't undead. One of the exhumed bodies had passed away more recently, so her body was in better condition, which people of course took as a sign of her being a vampire. This led to them burning her heart and liver, and then they mixed the ashes with water. This is most definitely a crime today and pretty scary, but to make things even worse, they gave this concoction to other people in the town who had fallen ill as some kind of a cure. Imagine having to drink that and then still having tuberculosis after. Definitely not a good trade-off. In our number 9 spot today, we have Harold Holt. Harold was the 17th Prime Minister of Australia until his presumed death in 1967. In December of that year, Harold was with 4 other people when he convinced everyone to stop at Cheviot Beach for a swim. The weather conditions were pretty rough, so only one other person actually went into the water with him. Holt said he knew the beach like the back of his hand, but sadly he was taken by the sea when going for a swim. Despite the subsequent investigation that ensued, which involved the biggest search operation in Australian history, no body has ever been found. The disappearance has been the source of mystery since the day it happened, with many conspiracy theories being created around it. Some believed he faked his own death, while others believe he was killed by the CIA, and of course there are people who believe that it was simply just a case of getting caught in a riptide. Whatever truly happened here may be a mystery, but it is also an extreme tragedy. In our number 8 spot today, we have Jelly Rain. Back in 1994, residents of Oakville, which is a small city in Washington, reported a series of mysterious translucent gelatinous blobs covering the ground. From the first report, over the next 3 weeks, more discoveries of this strange substance began to roll in, with many people claiming that they had fallen ill as a result of coming into contact with it. Many people believed that this substance had actually come down from the skies like rain, as each of the blobs was about the size of a grain of rice, and they were strewn about the ground just as rain would be. There are of course tons of theories as to what this substance could be, and that includes the fallout from some sort of military weapons test, but to this day nothing has ever been confirmed, and it remains just as much of a mystery as it was 27 years ago. In our number 7 spot today, we have Derek Amato. One day in 2006, Derek Amato was having a fun day at the pool with friends before a life-changing moment occurred. Derek yelled for his buddy to pass him the football as he dove into the pool, but just one moment later, Derek had found his head hitting the concrete floor of the pool so hard that he gave himself an extremely severe concussion. The injury caused him to lose 35% of his hearing in one ear and left him with headaches and memory loss, but also a newfound ability. Just 4 days after the accident, Derek found himself somewhere he had never seen himself. In front of a piano. Despite never having played before, Derek found his hands gliding across the keyboard like he was a seasoned professional. He said, quote, "As I shut my eyes, I found these black and white structures moving from left to right, which in fact would represent in my mind a fluid and continuous stream of musical notation." While Derek has had to suffer through a multitude of side effects from his injury, he continues to say that he believes he was given a gift. This is truly an interesting story, but no one can quite figure out exactly how this happened. Derek isn't the only person with a story like this, and all are as equally amazing as they are perplexing. In our number 6 spot today, we have the wow signal. In August of 1970, 1977, there was a radio telescope at Ohio State University that detected a strange signal. The radio picked up a pulse of radiation that was super unusual and that was coming from somewhere by the constellation of Sagittarius. The signal lasted for 37 seconds, and it has been commonly referred to as the WOW signal because of the fact that the astronomers observing it were so shocked at the time that they wrote "wow" on the printout from the telescope. This signal was so shocking because it was in a band of radio frequencies that are internationally banned on Earth. There are a multitude of natural sources for radiation in space that would cover a multitude of frequencies, so there are scientists who are skeptical that this could be proof of alien life, but skepticism doesn't mean it should be ruled out. Maybe this signal came from a huge astronomical event, or perhaps intelligent alien life with a very powerful transmitter who are trying to contact us. At the end of the day, this signal was detected in 1977, and we still don't know exactly where it's coming from or why it exists, so who's to say for sure? In our number 5 spot today, we have the Mothman. Back on a dark November night in 1966, 4 young people, 2 couples, claimed that they saw a tall bird-like monster that had glowing red eyes. They claimed they saw it while they were cruising down a back road near Point Pleasant, which sits in rural West Virginia. They explained that whatever this creature was, it rose into the air, unfolded these huge bat-like wings, and chased them as they sped away as fast as they could, totally frightened by what they had just seen. From here, stories of the Mothman continued to spread, with more sightings coming in the following weeks. This story, of course, is what inspired the 2002 movie The Mothman Prophecies, which was based off of John Keel's book that told the stories of these uncanny sightings and experiences in relation to this mysterious creature or being. This is because he believes that this creature was somehow mysteriously linked to the collapse of the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant in December of 1967. This bridge collapse took the lives of 46 people, and that included some of those who had said that they had an experience with the Mothman. Some people believe the story, others think it's just folklore and gullible people, so here I am asking, what do you think? In our number 4 spot today, we have the Mary Celeste. Okay, I'll admit, this one's out of our lifetime, but I mean, the Mary Celeste, it's a classic mystery. The Mary Celeste first set sail on November 7th, 1872 with a cargo full of alcohol. What happened over the next month isn't quite clear, but what we do know is that on the afternoon of December 5th of the same year, another ship on the Atlantic crossing found her drifting somewhere between Azores and Portugal. The captain of this ship knew the captain of the Mary Celeste and knew that he was a skilled and capable sailor, so he was extremely suspicious. He ordered a crew to board the Mary Celeste, and when they did, they found that the ship had been deserted, but it was in full seaworthy condition, so why had they abandoned it? Especially the captain. The captain of the ship that found this derelict split his crew and sailed the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar for more investigations, but despite this, the captain, his family, and the crew of 7 that were on board the Mary Celeste simply just disappeared, and no one knows what happened or where they could have gone. I think this one is so famous because it has no answers tied to it at all. Like, it really is just one of those mysteries with next to nothing to go off of in terms of clues. In our number 3 spot today, we have Alien Visitation. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker are 2 men who are from Mississippi, and back in 1973, while fishing, the pair swear that they were abducted by aliens. They say that they heard strange sounds and saw weird lights above their heads. When they looked up, they saw an oval-shaped object that they say was about 40 feet across and 10 feet high. The pair explained that during this abduction they were fully conscious, but they were unable to move. It isn't exactly clear what they entailed, but the men say that the extraterrestrials conducted experiments on them before releasing them. Of course, many people said that the men were lying, but both of them passed a polygraph test. Polygraphs aren't the most accurate tool in the world, but the chance of both of them passing is a lot slimmer than if it was just one person. This has led some people to suggest that perhaps they experienced some sort of combined dream, but even if that is the case, how that could have happened is still very much a mystery. Who knows if they actually experienced something or not, and if they did, what exactly it was. In our number 2 spot today, we have Ouma Mula. So a few years ago, scientists all agreed that we had found an object that was flying through our solar system, and it was widely agreed that it was an interstellar comet that had swung out from around another star. But upon closer examination, they realized that something was propelling it and causing it to accelerate, and this is when the debate really started, because They just don't know why. A.V. Loeb, who's a Harvard University astrophysicist, proposed the idea that rather than a comet, this could be an alien probe that was being pushed by a light sail, which is a very wide but extremely thin piece of material that accelerates by being pushed by solar radiation. Other scientists didn't agree with this and instead said that it's possible that hydrogen ice could have melted off of the object in a way that would mimic a rocket engine or something of that nature. But in August of last year, Avi wrote in a study that hydrogen ice is too easily heated and it would have melted off long before it reached our solar system. I guess we just have to wait it out while the scientists debate and gather more evidence to really know what's going on with this one. In our number 1 spot today, we have the MV Joyita. Around 5 a.m. on October 3rd, 1955, the MV Joyita set sail in the South Pacific. The voyage was meant to take between 41 to 48 hours, but by October 6th, the ship hadn't turned up at its destination. No ship or land-based operator reported receiving any kind of distress call from the crew, so a search and rescue mission was immediately launched. From October 6th to October 12th, the search covered roughly 100,000 square miles, but alas, no one nor the ship were found. 5 weeks later, on November 10th, a captain of another ship spotted the Joyita more than 600 miles from her scheduled route. The ship was capsizing and listing heavily, but it was extremely buoyant and would not sink. Despite this, however, the crew of 25 members were completely missing, and they have never been seen again. 4 tons of cargo were missing from the ship, and the ship itself was in quite poor condition. The pipes were corroded, and while the radio worked, the wiring was faulty, so there was only a range of about 3.2 kilometers. Because of how the ship was built, investigators are puzzled as to why the crew didn't remain on the ship, as it wouldn't have sunk, but this has led them to believe that perhaps something happened to the captain, where he was killed or incapacitated, which would have left someone less experienced in charge. To this day, no one is quite sure what happened to those aboard the ship, how it capsized, or where they ended up. It is all very much a mystery.
Kicking off the list at number 10, blindfolded gladiators. Remember that last scene in the movie Dodgeball when Vince Vaughn has to blindfold himself and then he still somehow wins? What a moment in time. No dry eyes in the theater at all. Amazing. But what if I told you gladiators would also pull the same trick off? Yeah, in order to get crowds to return to these massive events back in the day, they would need to change the formula up from time to time. They would have cheap beer nights at the Coliseum, which helped, but a new idea that worked was referred to as andabata, and that's when gladiators wore blindfolds during combat. How insane does that sound? Are you kidding me? I'd go and watch, probably, I don't know. They would also leave the armor inside. They would mostly battle in just sandals and cloth. Yeah, and you thought Marco Polo made you anxious? Try again. They would save these events for criminals, I guess, but like, come on, stealing bread and then fighting a tiger? The Coliseum was a little unfair, gotta admit.
In our number 9 spot today, we have India in World War II. It would be shocking to hear of a school not teaching anything about World War II, but it's often that we don't truly get the full scope of what went on. One thing I saw brought up a few times was the role that India played in the war and what they went through. Firstly, if you didn't know, India played a huge part in the Second World War. We normally hear of the large death tolls from the war, such as the 418,000 Americans who died, or the 450,000 people from the UK, which, don't get me wrong, is a huge and terrible number. But it is estimated that 3 million Indian people died in World War II, which is something I have literally never heard of anyone talk about before. India was fighting Japan, which for the record also had an extremely high death toll in this war, on the Eastern Front, and they were fighting Germany on the Western. World War II is a part of our global history, so why don't we talk about it and how it affected all of the countries? In our number 8 spot today, we have the Acadian Explosion. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far. This is something that happened in my own country, you guys, and I can honestly say this was never taught at the schools I attended. The Acadians were descendants of the 17th and 18th century French settlers who settled in the area that is now the Canadian Maritimes, so New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. In 1730, Acadians had to swear to British authorities that they would remain neutral on any conflict between Britain and France. Basically, one thing led to another, and the governor of Nova Scotia at the time, Charles Lawrence, saw the Acadians as some kind of a threat, and he also wondered why people who weren't from the area were allowed to live on such a beautiful part of the land. Well, isn't that real rich coming from someone who also wasn't from the area? But that is a whole separate conversation.
Charles tried to force the Acadians to take an unqualified oath of allegiance to Britain, and when they refused, he imprisoned them and then ordered them to be deported. A man from New England called Charles Morris came up with the disgusting idea to surround the Acadian churches on a Sunday morning and capture as many people as possible while also burning their houses and crops. This whole situation led to approximately 10,000 Acadians being deported, and apparently this whole ordeal had a fatality rate of 53% for the Acadians. This whole thing is honestly pretty disgraceful, and it's just something that we don't talk about. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Iranian Revolution of 1979. On August 19th, 1978, at the Cinema Rex in Abadan, Iran, there were hundreds of people watching a film when 4 men barricaded the doors, doused the cinema in gasoline, and lit the whole thing ablaze. This was a key event that led to the following revolution of 1979, but it truthfully had been building for quite some time, and this obviously wasn't the only event that led to this movement. This revolution was unique in the fact that it lacked a lot of the usual causes, such as a defeat in war, or a gigantic national debt, or an uprising of those in poverty. There is a lot that happened and a lot that went into this revolution, and I truly do not have time to cover in this video even half of it. But this revolution not only toppled Iran's absolute monarch, but it had worldwide political repercussions that are still seen today. In our number 6 spot today, we have Cyrus the Great. It is entirely possible that you may have learned about Cyrus the Great in school, as he was the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, but there is one thing he did that apparently a lot of us didn't know that possibly changed the course of our history. After he took Babylon over, he freed all of the captured slaves in the city and let them go back to their homelands. This included the Hebrews who were captured and enslaved from Judea. This may seem like a nice and reasonable thing to do, but it truly was more than that. By allowing these people to be free and return to their homes and continue practicing their religions, this may have been what has kept some religions alive. Without this move, it is possible that we may not have Judaism, Christianity, or Islam today, and that would have made our entire history very, very different. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Italian Renaissance dark side. When we think of the Italian Renaissance period, it is known for development and the rebirth that it caused, which makes a lot of sense considering the word Renaissance literally means rebirth. But there is one less glamorous and slightly frightening side to this period that isn't widely talked about. Sailors who had been returning from the New World at this point brought something less than lovely back with them, and that was syphilis, which spread through an entire French army. After this, the troops brought what was called the Great Pox to the rest of Europe. Since there was no penicillin or banana medicine back then, the disease spread rapidly and the symptoms were pretty gruesome. It would often happen that a person who had fallen ill would have the skin on their faces essentially be rotting away, which would leave large ulcers. Some people's noses and lips would be pretty much gone, and it happened often that people would sadly pass away from the disease. So basically what we think of as a beautiful time in Europe was both world-changing, but also very scary, and like pretty close to a zombie apocalypse. In our number 4 spot today, we have the history of dentures. I suppose this one is less of an event and more of a weird practice, but I just had to include it. I don't have a ton of experience with dentures, but they seem to be a pretty straightforward thing these days, aside from the cost of dental, but things weren't always the way they are today. Instead of dentures being made of fake teeth, before they used to be made with real human teeth, which is absolutely disgusting to me. After the Battle of Waterloo, scavengers went and took the teeth off of the corpses, which is quite a job, and then they sold these teeth to dentists. These dentists would boil the teeth, chop the roots off, and then attach these teeth to ivory base plates and then sell them to the customers. Aside from this being an extremely morally questionable practice in its entirety, it is also just so creepy. In our number 3 spot today, we have telephone cats. If you're a cat person, you might want to skip over this number. In 1929, 2 scientists at Princeton University wanted to conduct an experiment in order to test how auditory nerves perceive sounds. This is obviously extremely important research, but the way they went about this is truly messed up. They took a sedated but alive cat and cut out a part of its brain. They then attached one end of a telephone wire to the cat's auditory nerve and then the other end to a telephone receiver. When one of these scientists spoke into the cat's ear, the other one could hear it on the other end. This is cool, but most definitely not an excuse to do something so inhumane. There were of course benefits to this experiment, and it is believed that this may have helped lead to the development of cochlear implants, which is of course an incredibly important scientific advancement. The worst part, however, while the cat actually survived this experiment, instead of treating it like a king for the rest of its life like it truly deserved, these scientists instead decided to kill it to see if the experiment would still work on a dead cat. It didn't. In our number 2 spot today, we have the smallpox pandemic. I'm sure at some point or another, most of us learned about smallpox and the epidemic, which is something that we luckily don't really have to worry about much anymore. But one thing a lot of people explained that they didn't know was how badly it devastated indigenous peoples. Europeans who came over to America brought with them a multitude of diseases that they would have had some immunity to, considering it was likely their bodies had encountered it before. But this was not the case for those already living on the land that is now referred to as North America. Indigenous Americans not only had no immunity towards this disease, but also their traditional ways of treating illness may have only exacerbated the symptoms. Because of course, how could you possibly know how to treat something that you've never seen before and with no help from the people who actually do know? It has been estimated that the spread of this disease caused the population of Indigenous Americans to decline by 70%. That is absolutely insane. There's a theory that this spread of disease may have been one of the only things that led to the colonization of North America. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Tulsa massacre. This is one that many people, including people from Tulsa, explained that they didn't really learn much about in school. This event occurred on May 31st and June 1st of 1921, and it has actually been called the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. This happened in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and basically just mobs of white racist people went out and attacked black residents and businesses. What started this was when a 19-year-old black man named Dick Rowland was accused of harming a 17-year-old white girl, and he was subsequently arrested, and there were rumors that he was going to be lynched. This of course drew a bunch of racist white people out of their homes to participate, but then a group of around 75 black men also showed up to make sure that he didn't get lynched. One thing led to another, and a firefight broke out that led to 10 of the white people and 2 of the black people being killed. After this, all hell broke loose. Just last year, the last living survivor of the massacre, R&B and jazz saxophonist Hal Singer, passed away at the age of 100. And just last year, this massacre finally became a part of the Oklahoma State curriculum, and it's about time. Only a century too late. I also feel like in that I didn't include, but I should have said, that thing after the lynching was like only the beginning of it, and then everything got crazy and way more people died, and it was really destructive. I just didn't want anyone to think that I was making it seem like it wasn't as bad as it was, because it really was. Anyways, that's been our list for today. Thank you so much for checking it out. If you learned of any of these in school, please let me know. I mean, I went to school in Canada, so obviously my curriculum won't be the same as yours, and yours won't be the same as the next guy, and you know what I mean.